All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have a most significant day today, November 25th. 85 years ago today, a most impressive chess game was played between Reuben Fine, the American, and Alexander Alekhine. In the A.V.R.O chess tournament, November 25th, 1938. I hope that's 5 years ago. 85 years ago, yeah. So, what is so remarkable about this game is that these two are both getting very, very close, if not directly into their absolute prime. And it was about this era where Alekhine was just mowing over everybody. We don't hear enough about Reuben Fine. He was truly one of the pillar players in the world in the 1930s and 40s. So let's go to the board. Fine is playing the white. Very interesting game that he plays, and they're going to do a Rui Lopez, a very good Rui, actually, where they do the typical opening. Alekhine backs all the way down to bishop a4, and then Alekhine pushes the d pawn. Now the Berlin defense is bringing the knight. Alekhine played this one this time, and Fine is going to go ahead and castle. We got the castle early, and then the bishop d7. He's going to keep developing, which they do. Usually in a Rui Lopez, you see the c3 pawn pushed. 2 reasons: gives the bishop an escape if the second player starts pushing those queenside pawns and or that knight. It can be dangerous for that bishop, and the bishop is an excellent piece on the diagonal. Down here, he's still got a superb diagonal. So there are many games where they continue pressing this bishop down to here, which is still a good diagonal. So that bishop's valuable. If you ever play the Rui Lopez, do not swap that bishop for this knight. No matter what, keep it. The second thing this c3 push pawn does, pawn push, is it gets ready for d4, fight for the center. So that's always a good move in the Rui Lopez. And now Alekhine's going to fianchetto, and here it is, the d4. Alekhine does not discuss this at this point. He goes ahead and gets his fianchetto over with. And by this time, and we will see many exchanges on the e5 in this game. Fine goes ahead and begins the exchange on e5. Alekhine will re-exchange with the knight because what this will do, they're going to change off a few pieces, and this will simplify the position enormously. And that is what we are going to see. And now the d takes the e5. So the position has been made simpler, and then Fine uncorks a splendid move here. Now we're still in the opening, right? Now his king pawn is weak. The way he compensates for that is f4. Very interestingly enough. So this is going to be a screaming match, and Alekhine goes ahead and says, let's simplify a little more. Let's take out the bishops. The queen will come and go check. Alekhine says, all right, wait a minute. Let's simplify even more. And now he takes it. Notice how quickly they skip through the middle game, and they get right to the end game. I mean, it is as close to the end game as you can possibly get in just 12 moves. Right now, you're supposed to be getting into the middle game. They're almost in the end game. They're in the middle game. But, man, talk about a quick simplification. And it does leave even pawns, 4 and 4, and 3 and 3. And it does leave everybody pretty much undeveloped except for the rook, because Fine got castled, and the fianchettoed bishop, and Alekhine can't castle. So his king is stuck in the center of what we can see is a pretty open chessboard. This is somewhat closed, kind of, but look at this open file here. So Alekhine has to play very, very carefully, and Fine goes ahead and takes the E5 again. That's one of the main themes of this. Now, here's one reason why I wanted to show you this incredible game. We're in the middle position, the middle game, approaching the end game. What does Alekhine do? A genius move. Alekhine is using his king as the blockader of the doubled central pawns. That's worth watching. Only Alekhine would have thought of that. Now, these pawns are weak now, of course, because they are blockaded. That was Nimzovich's big deal. He said, always try to blockade the double pawns, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're weak because they are blockaded in Black's territory and they have a lot of influence as well as possession. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to last, but just realize Alekhine blockading those did not all of a sudden make them worthless. Oh, no, not by a long shot. And Reuben Fine will use those pawns in a most interesting manner starting right now. Number one, the rule with doubled up pawns. The front pawn, once it's blockaded, the front pawn becomes the target because that's the weakest of the two. That's the easiest one to take. So what does Fine do? He immediately develops a piece protecting that front pawn because of its location. Is a really excellent location. You bump a knight into here, and if you can keep it there, whoa, you bump a knight into this outpost here, that would be screaming. Or even a bishop here. That pawn's dangerous. Same with this one. So this will be fun to see. And now his rook comes all the way over to f8. I'm not quite sure what he's thinking here. That's weird for Alekhine to do that. And then the knight to d2. And then the bishop takes the e5. See, this e5 pawn is considered a weakness, but it's so important. Alekhine goes ahead and takes it. Rather than re-exchange, he brings the knight back up higher to b3. So he's looking to come to here or here and pick off some easy pawns. Everything's on that side of the board. That is power. That is pieces, right? So perhaps that's what Fine is thinking. And so Alekhine will also exchange the bishop. And this brings up another partial open file for Reuben Fine to utilize. So his position is looking pretty decent. Alekhine's looking like he's stuck back there in the corner. His pieces, not his king, his pieces. His king is out here being the warrior. That is so interesting to see. And now Reuben Fine comes up. You don't ignore the side of the board. You can't do that. King will come to e5. Notice how Alekhine has turned his king into a fighting piece in the middle of the game. Only Alekhine could pull this off. That is just astonishing when you stop and look at that. Have you ever seen anyone do that with the king in a middle game? And yet again, it does have a sense to it because when we look at the board, there's not a lot of pieces out there flying around attacking each other. They have been changed off. So the most powerful piece on the board right now just happens to be in the center of the board fighting a rook and a pawn. That is amazing, right? I mean, this must be King Arthur He's got his sword out there, beating up on everybody. That is pretty impressive. And he's going to support his rook. Now, and this makes sense too, because you've already exchanged with the rook, and that's not a bad spot for a rook. You're centralized somewhat. You've got much more influence up there than down at the base. So leave him there and protect him, fundamentally so. That makes sense, rather than move him back. No, don't move him back. Leave him out there. And now, knight f6. Okay, so finally, Alekhine is bringing another piece out to help his lovely king. And Fine is going to start bringing his knight back onto the right part of the board. And now, of course, knight h5 hit the rook. And now, of course, you do want to bump back. Notice where Fine puts the rook. He didn't go all the way back down. He left an option open. And this is kind of a cool little trick. Okay, you've done your rook lift. Actually, it wasn't a rook lift. It is a rook lift, but he actually exchanged a piece with it, right? He took the bishop. So yes, a rook lift, but no. But instead of going all the way back down, leave your option to double up your rooks, because doubled up rooks on an open file, that's powerful. That's really powerful. So I like how he left that option open, and now Alekhine is being cautious. Time to kind of go back in, and here comes Fine. Fine is going to go ahead and make sure that this side of pawns of Alekhine's is disrupted. Very interesting strategy. And Alekhine recognizes that, and he says, okay, it's time to come back over here. You have to watch all sides of your board. This board is split evenly right down the middle. That half and this half. So you have to play both sides. That appears to be the thinking here, and it makes sense. And now, once again, yes, the doubling of the rooks on the file, something Alekhine does not get to do at this point, but he does get to bring his rook on the open file, hitting a target with the knight. So Alekhine has the open file. Reuben's Fine has the partial open file with the doubled rooks. It's going to be interesting to see who gets to prevail, because both of these gentlemen were really excellent rook players. Knight f3, bringing more pieces over here. The king's wide open. You got to go get him. And he knows that, so he comes back away a little bit. And now A is going to take b6, and C is going to take b6. He kept two of the pawns together, which is good for endgame. He's also got the rook behind the pawns. That's where that rook belongs. Everything's good that way. And now here comes Fine. Knight g5. Let's make an announcement. I'm coming after you. Bump it. Say, well, you don't get to do this for free. h6. Now, in a way, you say, well, that didn't accomplish much, because you bump it up and now you have to move it, and you can't come back to here. You'll just lose it. And going back to there doesn't make any kind of sense at all, putting it on the edge. The rim, and not on the rim, is dim. And you can't. So what was the point? Just to move up and then move back, make him bump up a pawn. In a way, that actually betters Alekhine's position. So what was the point of that? Where are you going to put your knight? Wait. He's not looking at his knight. What's he looking at? He's taking the f7 pawn. Check. He ignores the threat and opens up the file, and now he has direct access to the king. See, White's king isn't, but Black's king is open. So now you got to play heads-up chess. Alekhine, you got to play heads-up chess. Knight f3, he's going to bring his knight back now to here, and Alekhine pushes the g pawn, g5, and knight will come up to d4. This particular move is interesting because he's trying to put a mating net around the king, isn't he? He's corralling the king in the center of the field. He stopped this, and this. The only squares he has to go to is here and here. So he's going to keep the king in the open. That's kind of an interesting move for that reason, isn't it? Knight d4, an excellent place. Rook is going to come to bump the pawn, get the target. Rook h7. Rooks belong behind pawns, whether they're your own or your enemies. Now, Fine can start taking pawns, which in an endgame is absolutely critical. So this is a dramatic move. It's so powerful that Alekhine has to address it. Yeah. And you can see Fine's rook is better placed than Alekhine's. Fine's other rook is much better placed than Alekhine's, which hasn't even moved. Fine's knight is a monster compared to that dim one on the edge. Fine's pawn structure is more, he's got an isolated pawn, but his pawn structure, he's up a pawn. So that's strong enough. Alekhine has to address it, no question. Blam. Reuben Fine is playing the chess game of his life against Alekhine. Pegs on the 7th is what this is called. Very powerful move. If you can get both of your rooks on the 7th. Now, if you can do it earlier in the game, sometimes you have pieces and pawns on these rows, right? On this row, and you can just mow them over. Even without any targets, however, this ensures the king will stay out. It also ensures that you've got enough power to overcome the rooks. Very powerful. It's so good. Alekhine's forced. He has to take the rook. You can't leave it. Yet again, Alekhine had to wince because his opponent's rook is still behind the pawn and he can't save it. That's interesting. The backward pawn, the one who is behind, is always the weak spot. Reuben Fine, chess instincts, focuses on the weakness. Absolutely. Now he's going to take the file closest to the king. This is where to put your rook. If you do this, you're not paying attention. That has no good point. If you're doing it here, you're not paying attention. That has no good use. That pawn is solid as rock. Here is where you want to go. Fundamentally so. So there's a nice little chess lesson for there. And attack the weakness and take the weakness. The knight will be able to blockade because Alekhine put his rook on the right file to help coordinate that. So he gives the king a bluffer, an island, which is very good. Knight will come to f3. King will come to e5. I mean, c5. Boy, I wrote that as, that looks like an E. My C looks like an E. Yeah. King moves into check. You bet. Alekhine is so good. He can move into check in a little bit. So Alekhine, what's happening here? And you say, come on, man, the king is wide open. That's not Alekhine's style. True. However, one of the endgame principles, and perhaps this is what Alekhine is attempting to do, is he's down. There's no way he's going to bump that pawn in. So why focus on it? You can't save all your pawns. That can't happen. Now look, his pawns are further advanced than his two pawns here and his two pawns here. Granted, he's got a good passed pawn. It's being held at bay, however. So bring your king and help escort your pawns in. That, I believe, is what Alekhine is trying to show us he's doing here. And it's a good strategy. Well, the knight, now, if you do see something like this, you also have to pay attention to both sides of the board. That's absolutely essential. You can't just let him do whatever he wants while you're over here doing whatever you want. You got to keep your eye on both sides of this board. So this makes sense that fine brings his knight over. And now G4. Get the pawn as far as you can. And now rook G6. Look at where the rook is. He is behind the pawn. I'm not trying to talk down to you. I'm emphasizing this. This is a superb strategy we ought to follow if we wish to improve our chess games. The rook is behind the pawn. That's correct. That makes sense. Knight will come to D7. Now this is probably key that we see. Alekhine recognizes it's this side of the board I have to win with. I'm never going to make it. So what he does is he pushed his pawn to make sure that these don't stay together. That one pawn is keeping two at bay. That's another real good chess strategy to keep in mind. One pawn can stop two. So if it becomes a pawn race, Fine is going to have to concentrate on his pass pawn, and Alekhine's going to concentrate on these two pawns. So now he's bringing his pieces over. But Fine is not going to let him do it uncontested. He also has a representative here. And quite frankly, the rook can go all the way across too. You see, the rook is keeping his eye on both these pawns also. So this is a heck of a battle all the way across the chessboard. Very interesting how this works. Knight D7. And now, yeah, that strategy of Alekhine's was so important for keeping two pawns back that Fine does take the time to get rid of that pawn. That's worth it. Yes, he spends a tempo, but it's worth it because, yeah, this is the further pawn, but realistically, with the open files and all, it is easier to get a pawn into queen if you can keep two of them together. Those make it much easier. That's why Alekhine has kept these together. That's going to be much easier. That's why Fine has these two together. So this side's going to be the war. This side's going to be really, really the war. And now knight E5 hit the rook. So the rook is going to go to G5, pin the knight to the king, and Alekhine immediately saw that, and he has to go back. Yeah, you can't leave that. The pin, no, you have to have both your pieces functioning. So that makes sense also. And now the rook to F5, simplify. Now at this point, Fine is saying, I've got you where I want you, because he has three uncontested pawns on one side of the board. Two of those are connected. In the end game, without any pieces, there's no way White can lose unless you close your eyes and just start trying to move stuff. So this game's over. That is what Fine is announcing. He said, I've got you where I want you. Time for you to quit. And Alekhine says, nope, not gonna. I'm going to keep fighting because there always can be mistakes made, even at this level. With us especially, when it looks helpless, and it looks pretty cotton picking helpless for Black right now. There's no question about that. But when it does, sometimes it might pay to grimly hang on and do your best for another 5 or 6 or 7 moves, because you don't know what kind of mistake your opponent could make, right? So he's hanging on. He said, no, I'm not done yet. I've got more fight in me. So he says, okay, well, if you won't change your rook, let's change your knights. Now, at this point, when you're down material, you don't want to exchange, especially in an endgame. Not of this kind of endgame where pawns are on both sides. Fortunately, neither one of these guys have a bishop. The bishops would be a much better piece to have. But they don't. So rather than exchange, he comes to knight D3. He's hanging on. He's saying, no, I've got some stuff left in me. Blam. Ooh, that is a move. X-raying the rook. He's going to get the rook after all. Yep, that's what you want to do. The way Fine does this. And again, now as a general rule, isolated pawns are a weakness. And they are, because they don't have any pawn on this side or this side to support them like these two guys do. So that's a weakness. Is it? Number one, the location's fantastic. Number two, it's not blockaded. Number three, it's not attacked. And it makes an absolutely supreme outpost for his pieces. That's not a weakness, man. And if it is, he's using it so that thing is a tower of strength. That weak isolated pawn is winning this game for white. So see, all rules have an exception. That's the idea here. Rook d5 check. Now, yes, bump back to the rook so that you don't just lose the rook. Man, at this point, don't do that. No. You make sure you contact the rook. And then, of course, the rooks are exchanged. So now this is a disaster for Alekhine because his king is entirely out of the game. He's way back there in the sticks. But let's watch how he handles this endgame. Watch what he does. The first thing Fine does upon the exchange, he then gets his pawn out of danger. Don't let your pawns just be taken. No, you're in the endgame. You got to keep every pawn. At the same time, part of White's strategy is now going to be, since the king can't cover both sides of the board, and since Black still does have two pawns together, you've got to play both sides, but you want to push pawns on both sides so that if the king comes over to here to try to nab a pawn, you can push a pawn over here and go in for the queen. If he changes his mind halfway and starts chasing after this guy, then this guy over here moves. And so White's probably got this sewed up in the back. He pushes b3. Once again, the king comes. And notice how he's keeping the king centralized. That, as a general principle, is an exceptionally good thing to do. Knight d2. Again, notice that he's keeping the knight centralized so that in a worst case scenario, he's keeping his eye on the isolated pawn and on these guys so that he can kind of help bump them all together. And the next thing that White's going to do ought to do is begin to bring his king up and escort these pawns in. But the knight d2 just assures that he's got his eye on this side, because this knight definitely is on this side for his buddies, right? And here they come, a5. And now, king f1, here comes the king. And at this point, Alekhine resigned. Reuben Fine beat one of the greatest chess players in the world at that time. And so this is a great game to commemorate. And it was played on November 25th, 85 years ago today. So I thought, hey, that's kind of fun. It'll show a spectacular game where an American did legitimately beat the great Alexander Alekhine. And we don't hear too much about Reuben Fine. I can't quite remember the story, but he was also exceptional at blindfold chess, if I remember right. And back then, those guys, you've seen the videos with Magnus Carlsen amazingly doing blindfold chess with 3 simultaneous games of chess, and they videoed it. Man, if you haven't seen that, you ought to watch that. That'll blow your mind. I mean, Magnus Carlsen, the best chess player on our planet today. These guys were doing 15 and 20, up to 30 games of blindfold chess and winning them all. But then the laws changed and they outlawed it. They said it was too taxing on the brain. So we do know Magnus Carlsen can do 3, but I do believe Fine was one of the better simultaneous blindfold chess players. Criminy Alekhine did 24, 28 games all together blindfold simultaneous and won every one of them. Some of his brilliancies are in those blindfold games of chess. I mean, it's amazing the minds these guys had. So, all right, hey, Thanksgiving holiday weekend. Hope this is fun for you. It's fun for me. I've got another chess game I'll try to get out either later today or tomorrow. I do have some errands I've got to go run and stuff to get done, but it's a lovely Saturday. I wish you guys the best holiday weekend you can get. Thank you for all your support and love and happiness and cheer, and I will see you very soon. I'm coming back, baby.